Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar about better PLM integration that leads to better business performance. Hi, I'm Julianne Grant. I'm with Razorleaf Corporation. We're really happy to be here with you today to talk a little bit about some recent insights that we did with a project with Jim Brown at 𝙤𝙀𝘼𝙍𝙍. So we might as well get started. I'm going to introduce our speakers today. So today, as I mentioned, we have Jim Brown, who's the president of 𝙤𝙀𝘼𝙍𝙍, and we also have Derek Needing, who's a VP of Integrations and Development at Razorleaf. We started working with Jim about, I want to say, 6 or 7 months ago, trying to decide on this project for integration to help Razorleaf really better understand what's going on in the integration world, because it's something that, as a PLM service provider, that we do quite a bit. So we're really excited to share some of the survey results with you today. I'm going to hand it over to Jim. He's going to take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Julianne. I appreciate it. Very excited to share some of the results of the survey. We're going to start and talk a little bit about the importance of PLM integration and why it's such a valuable topic and such a valuable investment. We'll talk about some of the results from the survey specifically, and then I'll end with some key takeaways before handing it over to our next speaker. So by way of introduction, 𝙤𝙀𝘼𝙍𝙍, we're an independent research organization. We basically are focused on helping companies understand how to get better business value from technology through a number of different presentations, educational types of research, industry papers, ebooks, and presentations like this. In terms of my introduction, I always like to say that if you have heard that it's Jim Brown presenting or James Brown, Godfather of Soul, it's I'm none of these people with none of their talent, unfortunately. Instead, on the next slide, I've got a little bit more of a reasonable introduction of who I am. I've got a background in industry, background in management consulting. I've been in the software industry, both within PLM and also in enterprise and supply chain. And then for about the last 15 plus years, I've been focused on the PLM industry, primarily with 𝙤𝙀𝘼𝙍𝙍, but also having worked with others along the way, including Technology Evaluation Centers, Aberdeen Group, and actually doing some work for some others behind the scenes. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about the study that we worked on. We put together a web-based survey and really tried to understand what people were doing across the board for PLM integration, and ended up with over 150 respondents to the web survey. We obviously got some people that were consultants. We got people that were manufacturers and designers, as well as some academics. The results I'm going to share with you are really those that are in the business of designing and manufacturing products, whose companies are. Some of them obviously were from departments like information technology, but others were engineers and administrators for PLM systems. And we got a variety of different sizes, industries, and geographies for the company. So it's a pretty diverse group. So we started just asking companies with an open-ended question: why is it important? What are the benefits of a well-integrated PLM system? And we just created a little word cloud to show what are the most common things that people said. And I don't think it's hard for anybody, even if you've got old eyes like mine, to see what showed up at the front. Companies really talked about efficiency being the reason to integrate PLM. And other things showed up: being able to have accurate, visible, centralized information, reduce redundancy, have fewer errors, and that people talked about fewer errors, downstream in manufacturing as well as fewer errors within design. But the core was efficiency, and I think that's important because when you look at why people implement PLM in the first place, there are a lot of strategic reasons to put PLM in place. But for the most part, most companies are trying to drive operational efficiency at the same time they're trying to improve new product development, innovation. But efficiency is a key benefit of PLM, and what we see very clearly is that an integrated PLM system is what drives that level of efficiency. So as we started looking at the at PLM integration, we broke it down into several pieces, and we created something called the PLM Integration Lifecycle, or we have a framework now for this PLM Integration Lifecycle. For people that have spent time working on PLM integration for a long time, I think they recognize the fact that there are a lot of challenges, not just in initially implementing PLM, but across the entire life cycle. I guess we're going to go to a poll here first. So let's start with a poll on challenges. We're going to go ahead and say what PLM implementation challenges are you experiencing, and you can select one of these. This is the same similar question to what we asked of the participants. Okay, and here are our results. What we see is that companies report several different areas. Knowledgeable resource shortage. We hear that a lot as we talk to companies about integrating PLM. Integration is really just a different animal when it comes to an IT project. It tends to be one of the most complicated and one of the most confusing and challenging parts of any IT initiative, and we also see taking too long and being too expensive. Let's go ahead and let's shift to what we heard from the overall from the audience of the actual survey itself. So we see the same thing up at the top: knowledgeable resource shortage, with actually the #1 thing that we heard from companies. And again, it really is one of the most complicated projects that most companies work on when it comes to their implementations, because you have to understand the technology of each system, you have to understand the business processes of both systems, you have to understand the semantics of the way they describe the data and what it means. So there's just a tremendous amount going on with that. You also see third down, it takes too long, and fifth down, that it's too expensive. And those are things that we hear quite a bit as well. And I think what that comes down to, if you just build this one time, is complexity. What you'll see is that most companies really struggle with particular PLM integration, because it's not just integrating an ERP and a CRM system. We've got complex files, we've got complex relationships between data, and because of those things, we end up with a much more challenging integration environment. But implementation challenges aren't the only thing that companies struggle with. They also struggle across the life cycle. If you think about implementing an integration and getting the technical integration in place, the next thing is operating it. And so as we're operating PLM, we run into a number of challenges as well. And if we can get the next slide on that, that would be great. Just past that. Oh, actually, you're absolutely right. Let's go to our poll. Apologize for the little clumsiness on my part today. Operational challenges are really as you're running the integration on an ongoing basis. So let's take a quick look at what people online think about when they're focused on their operational challenges. So I'm going to give everybody just a couple of minutes for that. All right, we're going to wait just another few seconds here as some results come in. If you can please give us your thoughts on operational challenges, that would be very helpful. All right, and what we find is definitely that there are lots of things that happen in the operational phase, and it's interesting that what comes up here is the number one is disconnected business processes, and that's not surprising because one of the things that people really struggle with is not just data being transferred between systems, but really trying to make sure that you've got a common workflow or a consistent workflow that ties people together in a way that runs the business effectively. And then you see a lot of people having to look for data in multiple systems, and we're going to come back on that one because we tried to quantify that a little bit as well. So let's go ahead and look at the survey results in terms of operational challenges. And what we see is, first and foremost, really the top two are going to be tied here. We see that looking for data in multiple systems was roughly half of the companies that we surveyed said that was one of their significant operational challenges. But we also see handling integration exceptions and issues. And so when you start to think about what happens in a PLM integration, our experience really shows us that getting systems to connect together, is a bit of a challenge. But when you really want to know how well systems are integrated and how well thought through the integration is, oftentimes it comes down to what happens when something goes wrong. What happens when a file was supposed to be transferred and it wasn't? Or what happens if a piece of data wasn't recognized? How well and how gracefully can the system recover and, first of all, flag the issue, and then secondly, recover from it? And how much extra manual effort does that require? And that's really a lot of the art of integration, is making sure to do that well. But you also see, as this group said, disconnected business processes, things like manually gathering data for other people and duplicate data entry. All of these things are signs that integration is not going particularly well. So let's go on to our next poll on maintenance challenges. And this is the third part of the PLM integration lifecycle that we talked about: implementation, operation, and then maintenance. So obviously this is what some people call the tail, and sometimes this is the most challenging part. So what challenges are you experiencing? What's your, and obviously you get to only pick one here in our survey. We had the opportunity to let people pick multiple ones, but in this case, if you would pick your top challenge, that would be fantastic. So we're going to give people another little bit of time to put in their maintenance challenge. Okay. And I think you see very clearly here that adjusting to business process changes shows up at the top, and there's lots of different areas that can be a challenge for people. But that certainly is one that we certainly ran into during the survey, and you see disrupts operations. There are just a lot of things that happen in that ongoing maintenance phase that are not steady state. So let's go ahead and look at the survey results from the actual survey itself. And what we see here is that actually about half of the companies that we talked to said that keeping up with releases of different systems was a big challenge for them. And then, as our group today said, hard to adjust to business process changes. And it's exactly those couple of things that I think are some of the biggest challenges. Is in the same way when you're operating something, the litmus test is how well can you adapt to something going wrong. In this case, it's how well can the system adapt when, how well can we adapt when something changes, whether it's a business process change, a system change, or sometimes a combination of those things. So we also see disrupting operations and then being too expensive and having high risk on the back end. And those are obviously always concerns. So again, the more elegant or the better integrated you are, a lot of these maintenance challenges are going to be reduced. So we talked about challenges across the different areas of the life cycle. Let's go ahead and talk about the impacts of those challenges. This is where it really hurts the business. And in this case, we did ask what was the #1 impact, and we let people only choose one. The #1 thing that we heard back, or the most frequent thing we heard back, was that that the impact of those challenges is inefficiency. And again, if you think back to that word cloud that I brought up, the integration benefits that companies are focused on are really efficiency. That's one of the biggest benefits from PLM is efficiency, and now we're seeing that one of the biggest impacts is inefficiency. But also I think the second one is important, which is delaying or preventing engineering tool upgrades. Oftentimes what we hear is that because of integration and because of that maintenance challenge that we just saw on the previous slide of not being, having difficulty adapting as systems change, we see people waiting to upgrade a system, whether it's a PLM system, whether it's a design tool, whether it's a simulation tool, until they can upgrade multiple things at once. And depending on the way things are integrated, particularly if they're done in a point-to-point fashion, it's very hard to keep up to date. And what ends up happening is people will actually keep a tool that can help their company innovate and design better products, keep it on the shelf for a period of time because it's too difficult to update the integration. So I've got a series of pie charts up here as well, and these are some of those issues we saw before with duplicate data entry, looking for data in multiple systems, inconsistent data across systems. And I realize that this is an eye chart, and we're not just trying to give you an idea of the data that we collected. You're actually welcome. The survey is published today, the report, so you're certainly welcome to download that. You can find it on my site, or you can find it on the Razorleaf site. And a couple of highlights, though. If you think about looking at, doing duplicate data entry and the inefficiency of that, we saw that the majority of companies do that on a daily basis. Okay, and then you asked companies, we gave an option to say that they never have to duplicate data entry, and only 4% said they never had to do that. And just another example is about 3/4 of the companies said that they had to access multiple systems on a daily basis, and actually nobody said that they didn't ever have to do that. And again, these are companies that have PLM. These aren't companies that are saying, we don't have a PLM system or we don't have it integrated. This is when you've got PLM and PLM's integrated, it's still challenging, and companies still have to face a lot of these things. So there's really a lot of room for improvement for the way companies integrate their PLM systems. So with that, I want to talk about something called our performance banding process. One of the things that we like to do at TechClarity is a benchmark process that we call performance banding, and you'll hear us talk about top performers versus others. And what we do is, as we're looking at a particular topic, we try and understand which companies that we survey are doing better than other companies, and then try and use that to make recommendations for others to improve their performance. So,
Jim,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I'm getting some feedback that some people can't see the screen, so I'm just gonna toggle the show my screen one more time to make sure people can see it. Is anyone else having problems seeing the screen? I've gotten one question, so I just wanted to pause it and show it again. I've re-showed my screen. Can people see my screen? Sorry about this.
I can see Julianne.
Okay. All right, let's continue. Oh, okay. Yeah, we're getting some yeses. Okay.
Okay, good, good. Well, sorry for the sorry for that. For those that couldn't see the screens, I'm certainly happy for anybody to get a copy of the presentation, and pretty much everything we showed so far is also in the report, which is available. So anyway, so the benchmarking process of performance banding really is to help companies understand what they can do to improve performance based on who's performing at the best. So the next slide actually talks about specifically for this report, how did we determine who are the top performers? So you see who gets the most out of PLM. And Julian, that is our slide 18, I believe. And what we look for, sometimes we look at metrics that are directly, to improving revenue or improving profit margins. In this case, because it's so clear that better PLM integration helps to achieve the benefits of PLM, we decided to look at those things that are evidence of a well-running PLM implementation and one that's meeting its goals. And you see the things there: efficient processes, ability to find information, accurate, timely information, consistent information, and then some result of that, the ability to make informed business decisions, and then also having tightly linked processes and data on an end-to-end basis. So as you hear me talk about top performers, these are the companies that were in the top 25% in terms of performance on these types of operational metrics. So the top performers are the ones that are really getting the most out of PLM, and now we're going to look at what they do differently. So we looked at those top performers and others, and we asked a number of questions, and I'm going to share just some of the results here today. But we asked how they view PLM integration, when they integrated their PLM system, what phase they integrated, whether it was initial implementation or latter phases, what they integrate their PLM system with, both on the enterprise application side, but also on the design tool side, what data they have integrated, and then how they accomplish the integration. So let's start with strategy. The first thing that we're going to see is that the top performers, again, the ones that are getting the most out of their PLM systems based on those operational metrics, are not quite twice as likely to see PLM integration as strategic. So what we see is that it really starts from the business strategy. It really starts from how they view PLM integration, that it's not a nice to have, or it's not that it really is important. But even in the others, we only see that 21% say that it's a nice to have. So 4 out of 5 companies that are others still think it's important or strategic, and even more than that in the top performers. So clearly it's an important topic. So let's look at some other things. This next chart is about the data that's integrated. And so again, we're not looking at, the most important thing to see is what these top performers in blue are doing differently than the others in red. And so the first thing that we see is they've just integrated more. They've integrated more applications. So you see that they've integrated to their PLM systems to about 50% more enterprise applications, and actually about maybe 2/3 more design tools. So in the people that are getting the most out of PLM have integrated more. And we actually see some themes in the way that they've integrated, and I believe we have a slide on that. So the themes that we saw integrated, in the integration had to do with a couple of different areas, and this is a generalization of some of the things we saw. But we saw a lot around mechatronic or smart products. We saw that a lot of the top performers had integrated with software development tools, EDA or electronic design automation, to design electronics and boards and those sorts of things, and application lifecycle management. So everything to do with the electronics and the software that are now working in conjunction with the mechanics on most people's products. But we also saw a connectivity to manufacturing, both with computer-aided manufacturing, or CAM, but all you know, in manufacturing execution systems at the bottom. These are execution tools, but also with manufacturing engineering tools, factory planning, manufacturing process management, or digital manufacturing tools. So, you know, not only are they integrating with more, these themes show that they're integrating with more advanced types of solutions, and they really are getting more out of their PLM systems by leveraging them further into other departments and further into a more advanced integrated view of mechatronic products, where you're working across the system of mechanics, electronics, and software. So the next thing we looked at was data, and I know this is again an eye chart, and at first glance it may not be clear the way this is sorted. So I want to talk about that first. Again, the blue is the top performers and the red is the others. We could have a chart here that says what are the most common enterprise applications that people have implemented to, or what are the most common design tools. But we don't believe that that's the most important thing to share here. What we look at is what is the most differentiating. What do we see these top performers doing differently than others? That doesn't mean that the most common things aren't important or don't add value, but what it means is these are the areas that we believe are associated with higher levels of performance. We believe that these are the things that are really setting companies apart. So the first one you see that's most different is 3D image and visualization files. It's really about sharing product information and graphical product information across most likely the enterprise, but even into the supply chain. And then you see some other themes start to come up as well. Manufacturing data. Manufacturing was a theme that we saw just before. Two down from there, manufacturing processes and routings. But you see things like test plans and specifications. You see a lot of things that are ways of sharing information and expanding processes across departments. And then you start to see towards the bottom things like items, bills of materials, drawings, documents, and you don't see as much differentiation in there. So the ones at the bottom tend to be common in both the top performers as well as the others. So again, they may add tremendous value, but what starts to set people apart is when they start to work on these other areas. So the next thing that we're going to look at is how companies integrate. And the first thing that you're going to see here is that there are lots of different ways people integrate. And if you start to add up these numbers, you start to see that the top performers and the other numbers add up well beyond 100%. And that means that there just isn't one way that anybody integrates. There's no one size fits all for these types of things. So anyway, if you think about things like event triggers, data transformations, bidirectional data flow, hub and spoke approach, you see that towards the top are some things that that are happening more likely in the top performers, and towards the bottom, things that are less likely, all the way down to the bottom of point-to-point, where you see point-to-point integrations being actually a little less likely in the top performers. And what we believe is that the top performers are more likely to try and use things like triggers and things like a hub and spoke approach, where they're taking a more maintainable, a more agile way of integrating, so they don't get stuck in that situation that we saw before, where they're not able to upgrade their design tools, for example, because they can't. It's difficult to upgrade their integration, or they run into a situation where it's very expensive and risky to make their upgrades and upgrade their integration. And then it's hard to add those additional pieces, where if we do see people more in the hub and spoke type of an approach, it is much more flexible and it is more agile, and it's easier to expand on that over time. And we do have we actually had a write-in answer from an automotive supplier in that same area, and I thought this just summarized what I was trying to say on the last slide very well. Their preferred integration standard is a proper enterprise integration hub. But it's not always available, and when it's not, they will default to a point-to-point. And so, one of the realities of working in the PLM integration world is that you have to use what's available. You have to have a broad set of tools, and then try and choose the best one for the situation. Because it's as we say in the report, it's often better to use what the vendor provides because it's going to be supported, it's going to be maintained over time, and then work your integration in around that. So just to summarize a couple of things, why is better integration important? The first thing that we see, top performers enjoy lower cost, lower risk, and have more effective integration projects. We saw across the board that those top 25%, those top performers, not only are they getting more out of their PLM system, they're doing things differently in a way that actually is driving them to have better performance against their integration projects themselves. So they're getting better results out of their PLM integration, but they also have a smoother process. And again, we believe it's a lot to do with that more advanced approach and a more mature integration tool set using things like hub and spoke, for example. The other thing that we see is, if you remember those pie charts before, we looked at some of the issues that companies face. There's impacts of inefficiency, or the impacts of the challenges that drive inefficiency, having to look in multiple systems, having inaccurate information or inconsistent information, and doing duplicate data entry. All of those things, we saw that those top performers that were not only getting more out of their PLM system and having easier projects, they also are running into fewer of those inefficiencies and fewer of those issues. So clearly they're doing something different that is worth taking notice of. So just a few key takeaways to summarize what I've said. Top performers are more likely to see to put up a strategic priority on PLM integration. They're more able to really across the implement, operate, and maintain areas of the life cycle. They are able to do that more cost effectively, but also in a more flexible and agile way so that they can make quick changes. They integrate both to more but also more advanced other systems, whether it's design tools or whether it's enterprise applications. They also use more advanced, mature techniques. They have a sort of a bigger toolkit to do that, as that aerospace supplier mentioned. And they're experiencing fewer of those operational issues. So overall, there are some other things in the report that weren't included here that I certainly hope you have a chance to take a look at. But I also look forward to answering questions and staying in touch on these things as well. So that is the end of what I have to say for prepared remarks, and I'll be around for the Q&A. But for right now, I'm going to turn it back over to Julianne.
Hey, Jim, thanks a lot for that overview. Yeah, that's really interesting. You can certainly see where, when you want to reduce the number of, data inputs and improve the data accuracy, why integration would make it a lot easier to move data from one system to another. And I think that what we're going to talk about next, and with Derek, is he's going to share a case study that and a successful story that we had with Inphi, who went through a series of integration processes to get higher efficiency and better customer service. So I'm going to hand it over to Derek. Derek, you're on.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Julianne. So let's talk just a little bit about our company. Just a couple slides here, then we'll talk a little bit about that Inphi case study, and then kind of wrap it up with some of the results that Inphi has seen by the integrations that they've done. So just a little bit about Razorleaf. We've been in business for about 17 years now. We are a consulting services company, so our focus is on professional services, whereas some other companies focus on the reselling of product. We tend to focus more on the implementation of that product. Currently, we have somewhere just over 40 employees. Those are on-staff employees. If you look at our kind of contractor network, it probably grows up closer to the 100 range there. And we operate primarily in North America. Our staff is based in the U.S. In fact, 100% of our staff today are U.S. citizens. and we operate across a number of, or I should say our employees are located across the number of states that we operate really in the entire continental U.S. as well as other parts of North America, a little bit overseas, but we're focused primarily here in North America. Throughout our history, we've had about 500 different implementations that we've done. Some of those implementations are smaller scale sort of things for a very specific solution. Other ones are what you would typically think of as an enterprise level PLM implementation that took, a considerable amount of time and a considerable number of resources to do. And then currently today, we have roughly 1,500 active customers. And so those are customers that we're currently working with. Not all of those customers do we have a consultant on site full time, obviously, but these are customers that within the last few months we've actually done some work with and that we're currently working on some project, whether big or small, with them. You'll notice down at the bottom that we focus on a couple of main products. We're the preferred, a preferred services provider for ARIS products, Autodesk products, and Dassault products. We do work with other products as well, a couple of the major players in the ERP industry, as well as other players in the PLM and PDM industry, and of course some other enterprise technologies like SharePoint and those sort of things as well. But with those three companies, we actually have some contractual agreements, and we provide services even directly to them for a staff augmentation perspective. But the point is that we've got some experience when it comes to the major PLM systems out there. Let's talk a little bit about what Razorleaf does, some of our core competencies and what we're all about. And I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I wanted to point out a couple things. One of the core beliefs of Razorleaf, this is from the day that we were founded, was that technology doesn't really solve any problems. The proper use and implementation of technology is what solves the problem. So while we want to be there to help you get that technology up and running, to get it installed and to get people trained on it and to configure and customize it and those sort of things, we recognize that if we don't look at the process and if we don't really step back and say, how can we use this technology, that we may not get the benefits that we were hoping to get. So you notice when you look at some of the core PLM competencies that we have, they really kind of cross that range. And so it's things like business consulting as well as process management. And so if we just simply take a PLM system and put it in place to duplicate what you're doing today, only in an automated fashion, that may not be the best solution. It may be better to look at what you're doing today and to talk about how you could do it differently. And that's really what led us to this discussion about integration. We recognize that all of our companies that were using PLM systems, whether they were using it across the enterprise or more in a departmental solution, in order to make them a better company, they needed that PLM system to talk to stuff. And we looked at really our history of implementing systems, and we said, every one of our customers that seemed to have had a lot of success in PLM, that success really comes when that system is not just standalone, when it's integrated with other things. And so that's why my role as the person in charge of our integration group, we actually said, let's actually stand up a business unit whose responsibility is to make sure these systems are getting integrated. Because we're doing our customer a disservice if we simply put the system out there and then just leave it be. It needs to be able to talk to other systems in order for them to get the most out of it. So again, the point is we want to make sure that the technology that you're using is being used the right way. It's not just be put in place and then walk away. And you'll see that when we get into this 𝑖nfi case study in just one second. And so last slide about Razorleaf here. When we talk about some of our core competencies, again, we recognize that we need to be part of your PLM team, part of your enterprise system team, really from beginning to end. There's no such thing as just coming in and installing a system and walking away and expecting that system to have a lot of success and a lot of benefit. There's planning that needs to be done. And so we try to maintain the knowledge base and the ability to help you with that planning, even vendor selection. And not all vendors do the same things the same way, and different companies tend to work better with different vendors depending on what the vision of the company is and how that aligns with the vision of the vendor. So we want to help with that. Of course, one of the largest components of any large system implementation is the actual technical stuff, the architect, the design, and the deployment. So we've got the skill sets to help with that. And then once again, we recognize that once it's up and running, a good managed system should not be stagnant. It should kind of have that continuous process improvement. And so that's where we kind of come into play and help with those sort of things. All right, so enough about Razorleaf. Let's talk about our customer here, Inphi. Talk a little bit about how they approached integration and what results they found. So let me tell you just a little bit about what Inphi is all about. Inphi is the leader in the data movement interconnection industry. And so essentially, in this world that we live in today, there's big data, there's IoT, there's all of these systems, these massive, massive databases and data centers that have systems in it. Inphi's job is to connect that stuff together. So if you have multiple data centers and you obviously want those data centers to talk to each other so that you can run the reports and do the things that you need to do, Inphi makes the switches, the connectors, the hardware that allow those systems to talk to each other. And so as you can imagine, with the way that the world is going with big data and IoT and those sort of things, their business is really doing well. Everybody wants more data, and they want that data faster. So Inphi needs to be an efficient company, not to mention that if you are a company that prides yourself on making data available quickly through your products, it's a little bit embarrassing if inside of your company you have trouble accessing data. And so there's a little bit of a reputation there that they need to maintain in order to prove that they actually know how to do what they're trying to convince you that you need to do. So what challenges then did Inphi face? Obviously challenges around growth and those sort of things, but the specific challenges they face are listed here. And what I found interesting about what Inphi found is these slides about Inphi, by the way, were created independent of Jim's survey. And so what's really neat here is that the challenges that Inphi found, you remember when Jim popped up that word cloud, the biggest word that was out there was efficiency. And if you look at the challenges that Inphi had, what are those challenges about? Well, they're about efficiency. Time being wasted, lack of visibility, things not being updated. Those are the things that they saw. Manual data entry. The second largest word on the word cloud that Jim popped up was centralized. And again, this is what Inphi found. Inphi found that they, if you look at the quote from Rob Johnson over there, the director of technology, he said that they had to go to various systems to find the data. So things were not centralized. No one knew where the single point of contact was to make sure that they had the right data. This was a challenge for them, and they wanted to improve their business, and so they wanted to find a way to do this. So what did they have to do? Let's look at what systems they had in place and what had to happen in order for them to do this. So Inphi had a couple different systems that were kind of the culprit behind these issues that they had. On the left side here, they've got a couple systems from Autodesk. Their PLM system was Autodesk Lifecycle Fusion, and their design management file system there, their PDM system, was Autodesk Vault. Then, of course, from the account management and the material authorization perspective, they had their CRM system of Salesforce, and then the financials and some other ERP-related things were done inside of Oracle e-business suites. So these are the systems that they had that they needed to talk together. Now, one thing that you recognize is that there's a couple different vendors at play here, at least three. There's different technologies. Even when you look at the same vendor, the two Autodesk products, they don't run on the same back-end database. They're different technology. And so it's not just as easy as saying, well, we have the same vendor, and so all of our data is in a single system, so it should be easy to connect. That wasn't the case here. Multiple systems from multiple vendors with multiple back-end databases. And so they were able to integrate these things together in order to make it so that what happens today at Inphi is that their PLM system, Autodesk Lifecycle Fusion, becomes the center point of contact for everything. So obviously, if you're a salesperson, you're going to live primarily in Salesforce. If you're an execution sort of person, you're going to live primarily in the ERP system. But the point is, the data that you're putting into those systems, the CRM or the ERP system, is not just standalone and sitting there alone. Anybody that goes in through PLM has access to that data in real time. And so we do that through a combination of synchronizing data. We also have systems where we simply look into the other systems, so more of a data warehousing sort of approach. There's multiple different approaches that are taken that allows us to have a single system, a single point of contact that can get to that data in all of these different systems. And so the results that Inphi found as they rolled this out there was a few that were mentioned that they were able to recognize. First of all, they were able to completely kind of change the way that the PLM system works. So instead of the PLM system being just a design system, it, as I mentioned, became kind of that center system that allows you to see everything out there. That's nice, but really at the end of the day, we have to make sure that whatever we're doing is making us more money or making us more efficient so that we can recognize greater profits. And so they saw that. They saw that when it came to customer communication, return material authorization, and those sort of things, that they were more efficient in the ability to do that. Just simply having greater visibility of data made them more able to kind of predict the future trends, more able to know what their clients and customers would be looking for and what they would need. And what Rob Johnson recognized once they had some of these integrations rolled out is that because the data is consistently and constantly updated, they're able to see all their data that they need from one place. And again, this needs to lead to something, and it does. It leads to customer satisfaction. The sales team is more efficient. And so all of those improvements now, of course, make them a better company that's more able to service their customers and grow at the rate they need to grow. Now, this next slide is key, because Inphi did all of these things and recognized real-world results in what they did, but are they done? And the answer is no. And this is a key takeaway from our discussion today, is that integrations don't simply end. They don't just, you tie system A to system B, and once it's up and working, you say, well, that was nice, now we're done with that. No, if your business is continually changing and improving, then you should continue to change and improve that integration. Initially, it may be a pretty basic integration, but eventually it may grow to be the sort of thing that's bi-directional and real-time and those sort of things. And so you want to make sure that you're looking at that, and so Inphi is doing that. So in the future, they're going to try to look for areas where they can continue to reduce manual data entry. They haven't reduced it all. They've gotten rid of some of it, but they want to continue to find ways to do that. Now that we've got all of this data connected, are we reporting on it? Are we actually looking at it and studying our data and making sure we know what problems we have and where inefficiencies exist in the company? So again, the point is that this slide here should never go away. The items will change, but there should always be multiple things that we're trying to do and then a future. And that will continue forever because we should always be trying to improve those systems that we're connecting to. So let's talk a little bit then about how we might be able to help you with this. I think that's a duplicate slide, Julian. Yeah, there you go. So let's talk a little bit about how we can kind of help with that. As I mentioned earlier, Razorleaf provides a number of services that can help the process analysis, mapping, re-engineering sort of processes. Also, we can help with some of the analysis that needs to be done. We find a lot of times, and Jim mentioned this in his survey, that a lot of times customers don't begin implementation really because they're kind of scared. These systems are very complex. We don't know how to integrate them. And that's an area where I think that we can help, because while some of these systems are very complex, one thing that we have found over the years is that integrations are really very similar. Even when you're integrating two systems that maybe you've never integrated before, the approach that you take is very similar. There's a skill set to integrating things that is a skill set in and of itself. That's an area where we might be able to help, is to kind of look at what you're doing today and say, well, have you thought about integrating these systems? And oftentimes the answer is, well, yeah, we thought about it, but is that really possible? And we can kind of throw out there some ideas on how we've seen other people integrate systems, similar systems or systems just as complex. Additionally, we want to invite you also to participate with us over the next couple months in a webinar series. So the webinar today was the first of a series of webinars that we hope that you'll join us for. So today we kind of talked at a high level. And that high level was, what is integration all about? Why should you do it? What benefits do you get? What challenges are there? And then we talked a little bit about a case study of someone who saw some results. But going forward, we want to actually get into the nitty-gritty of how these integrations work. So Jim talked about, as he went through his session, about a point-to-point solution versus a more of an enterprise architecture solution? What's the difference? Why would you choose one over the other? Well, in the middle of the first quarter there in late February, early March, we want you to join us where we're going to talk about that. What are some of the integration technologies that are out there and the different approaches that you can look at that will help you make that decision about how we want to integrate? With that webinar as well, we'll release a white paper that will go into really a great amount of detail about the pros and the cons of different integration approaches. I mentioned earlier that we deal with enterprise systems outside of the manufacturing and engineering space, including things like SharePoint. It seems like everybody out there has SharePoint. And one of the first things that we're asked when we talk to a lot of our clients about integration is, how can we integrate this with SharePoint? People use SharePoint. It's very ubiquitous in the company. And so in April or early May, we want to talk with you about how we can integrate with SharePoint. And here's what we're going to discuss in that webinar, is a lot of people get confused because SharePoint is a collaboration platform. SharePoint has document management and revision control capabilities. And isn't that what PLM does? So what's the difference? What goes in PLM and what goes in SharePoint? Do they do different things or do they do the same thing and overlap? Is there a coexistence strategy? So in April or May, we're going to talk about that. And again, we're going to have a white paper that's going to talk about how those two systems should play together and what our vision is on how those things work together. And then lastly, in June or July in the summertime, we want to talk about PLM connected to the rest of your business. So now we're talking about connecting PLM to the ERP systems out there. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some case studies and some things that we've done there as well, so that you can see the benefits of getting PLM outside of that engineering space to the rest of the company. By the way, these webinars that we want to talk about, you're welcome to join us during these time frames. Again, invitations will be going out. If you have a burning question about any of these that you want to talk about now, we're happy to talk about it now as well. So if you need to talk about SharePoint before April or May, just give us a call and we'll talk to you whenever you're ready about those things. So I think that's all I have. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Julianne, who will moderate any questions that are out there.
Great. Thanks a lot, Derek. That was very interesting, sharing the 𝑖mpI story. So we do have some time for questions and answers. It's about, well, we got 5 minutes or so before the top of the hour, and everyone's got stuff to do. We'll open up the questions area if anyone has any, and we'll just wait a second to see anyone what comes in. So I did get one question in. The question is, when do most companies integrate PLM with other systems?
Well, I'll take a first stab at that, and Derek, I'm sure you've seen a lot in your experience. When we asked that question in the survey, I mentioned that we asked when, in terms of what phase, whether it's the initial implementation phase or latter phases of, and oftentimes we do see companies say, well, we're going to get to integration in the next phase, and sometimes the next phase keeps moving out because they're a little bit afraid. But we do see top performers integrating sooner. One thing that I think is interesting is that there's a little bit of a difference going on between when they integrate with design tools and when they integrate with enterprise applications. We see that companies are more likely to integrate right off the bat with design tools, and then over time do more integration with enterprise applications. But we're starting to see a bit of a shift in that as well. Companies that have been implementing for longer are now starting to do more enterprise application integration, and it's sooner as opposed to later. And I think that might be because the tools are easier to integrate now with enterprise applications, but also because PLM is involved and people are doing a lot more business with their PLM tool as opposed to just design and data management.
And Jim, let me piggyback onto your comments. So I would agree with you about a lot of companies say that integration will be the next phase, and that next phase seems to roll out. So to answer the question, when do we see companies integrate? The answer is not soon enough. And I'm not so concerned about when the integration actually goes live, but to the point Jim made during his presentation, when are you thinking about it? You need to be thinking about it. It needs to be part of the strategic plan. So if it's phase 2 or phase 7, I really don't care. But are you thinking, is it part of the plan, or is it just something that you hope to do one day and you don't know how you're going to do it? That's the key. It needs to be part of the plan.
Great. Thanks, guys. Got another question here. How do you integrate with systems where expertise might be lacking, like a legacy ERP system or a system where there are a few experts within a company?
So I'll take that, Julianne. So I think that the answer to that is that I mentioned during my part that really the integration skill set is a skill set in and of itself. It may be that there's a legacy ERP system that's running on an AS400 and we don't have any AS400 programmers currently on staff, and that does happen. But the question is, can we get to that data? Because if we can get to that data, the approach to integrate with it is really very similar. It doesn't really matter where the data is coming from. The integration takes a standard approach regardless of the source system and the destination system. So I think that one of the challenges that companies face when it comes to integration is that being afraid of, do we know enough about the system? I would challenge that, yeah, you probably do. You don't probably have to know as much about that system in order to pull some data out of it as you might think that you do need to know. And so it is a challenge, but it's not an insurmountable challenge, even with systems that are very, very old and not well supported.
Yeah, I think I find, Derek, that one of the biggest challenges is understanding the business process and what needs to happen. And the top challenge that we saw was actually being able to to find qualified resources. And I think part of that is there are lots of technical firms out there. There are people that can do integration. There are firms that can do PLM, but there are not a lot of firms that have both sides of the equation. And so, maybe not knowing the AS400 system, but knowing what that, say it's an old BPIC system, BPIC ERP system, knowing what that kind of system does, what are the likely touch points, where are you going to get the most value, that kind of expertise, is a rare skill set and is an important one. And obviously, I think without being sucking up too much, I think you guys are very strong in that area, one of the few that does that so well.
I think that's the key, Jim. I think it's not so much about the systems, it's about how do they need to talk to each other. And that's really where the skill and integration.
Great. We got one more question. I think we're kind of running out of time, but I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's important. So someone is saying that they're new to PLM. So are there any differences for companies that haven't had PLM as long? Are there other issues that they should be aware of, or should they just be planning for it right from the get-go?
I hate to be the one to say this. One of the things that we saw in our report is that companies that are newer to PLM often underestimate the complexity of PLM integration, and maybe they're still in happy demo mode. But the companies that we've seen that have had PLM for longer actually recognize the risk, recognize the cost more than newer companies. Now, it's possible that as the Inphi example Derek shared, they're using a cloud-based PLM system, and it's a more modern infrastructure. So it may be that they're the older companies are using older architectures, older systems. But I also think there is an element to it of just having some experience and knowing that this is difficult. And a lot of companies have tried to do things on their own and failed. So I think that as a newer company, what my advice to you would be is to learn from those that have gone before you.
Yep. And certainly putting a PLM system in place in itself, if you've never had one, is a culture shift. And to try to link that culture shift with other major culture shifts, that's a recipe for disaster. And so that's why I do think that some of the more mature implementations, and we're not talking about just that you've had product X for this many years, but have you been doing PLM sort of things, maybe with product X, Y, and Z over the years? That's the key. Is are you thinking the way PLM thinks? And if so, you're going to have a little easier path when it comes to integrating them.
Well, great. I think that concludes, we're about out of time here. It's 2:02. We appreciate everyone's time today. So we have recorded this presentation. Will we be sharing this? We'll also be sending out the copy of the report that Jim had shared earlier in this presentation. Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you so much, Derek, for your time today and sharing your insights on what you understand and see in integration. And we thank everyone's time today and have a great day. Thank you.